we are at Pittsburgh Airport. TSA pre-check was easy. We're sitting here at the Delta Gate, getting ready to head to New York. What do you want to say, honey?
Let's go. Horns also are a symbol of salvation and safety. If you grab the horns of the altar, which a couple of characters in the Bible did, you were claiming no one could kill you there. Of course, if you look at the text more carefully, you had to be a righteous man to do that. In other words, an unrighteous man could be killed at the altar. Also, we have to see this altar right here where we are as another thing too. It was a symbol of pagan sacrifice because it wasn't proper. And during the time of Hezekiah, when he made reforms in Israel, he tore down every altar he could find, every vestige of pagan sacrifice, including altars like this. This was not here. This was found in pieces elsewhere and put back together. Just a nice reminder that Hezekiah did do some very righteous things in Israel. The most mighty king for righteousness and stability. We're now at the Tel Megiddo. The Tel is a man-made hill. It's above what we know as the Valley of Armageddon. This is the city gate, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but the city gate is more than just an opening in a wall. It actually, in the ancient times, was really a barracks, storehouse, city government. Almost everything that was important to a city took place at the gates. There were even stores for the poor here. There were soldiers stationed here. There were government leaders would meet here to judge things. That's why you see those phrases in the Bible about how such and such a king sat at the city gate. And in some places there's even the seat of Moses, that we'll talk about in a future video a little bit more, was located there.
This is Naomi. She lives on a
Kibbutz.
kibbutz.
Kibbutz Bet Ha'emek.
Aha! And her specialty is avocados
And lychees.
and lychees. Okay. Enjoying a view of the Sea of Galilee.
Could be clearer, huh?
Very misty today.
Can we see the Golan Heights? Over there? These hills?
Here are samples of the architectural ruins, the pediments laying on the ground. That's called a Roman ogee. We still call it that today on our trim that we put in our houses. That's how you know, although this was built for Jews and by Jews, you see the Roman influence. Also, you see sections of pillars. That's how they were built. They weren't one single piece. They were progressive pieces stacked on top of each other. Again, simple Roman form. Here we are at Khorazin. I'm standing in what was used as a mikvah, a ritual bath. I suppose I would be at least partially underwater by now if it were in operation. The thing I wanted to point out was the idea of ritual cleanness in Hebrew thought. It's all throughout the Bible. Clean what you eat, clean how you live, clean how you take care of your personal body. All these things were in the physical realm, but deeply embedded in the Bible and in Jewish thought was the idea of cleanness of spirit, cleanness of heart. The synagogue at Khorazin, and this is the seat of Moses. You've heard of it, I'm sure, in the New Testament. Jesus told the disciples, don't do what the Pharisees do, but do what they say. They were an authority, even though he was at odds with them all the time. And he said, why? Because they sit in the seat of Moses. That's what this is. The person who sat in this was an authority in their community. In this case, it was in the synagogue. And this is where they sat to make judgments. Because it was the seat of Moses, it was a reminder of where the law came from. It came from Sinai, from God, through Moses. We're inside the synagogue at Khorazin. There's a lot, this tells us a lot about philosophy, about how the Bible has changed in people and how they've interpreted it, how they interacted with each other because of it, how they gather. I just want to talk about the word synagogue to begin with. It's a Greek word, synagoge, which means to gather from around. And it's a gathering place. A synagogue is more than just a church. It's also a social center where lots of other functions took place. When we came in, we showed you the seat of Moses, for example, was the judgments. But also there could be family activities, all sorts of other things, as well as weekly scripture reading. What we see here, I'm sitting on a seat here, and it's kind of hard to tell, but this tells us something about how the attitude of the early synagogue, especially we'll see in Nazareth, where Jesus read the scripture about himself in Isaiah. And that is that the seating was completely all the way around. Everybody looked towards each other. There was almost a sense of equality amongst everybody. And just about anybody in the congregation could read public reading of scripture as Paul admonished Timothy took place. The value of that was understood. I'm told that as time went on, the synagogue changed. If you go today, you have rows much like we have in churches, and everybody's focused on one man at the front. And that almost tells us something about the change in attitude. There's not as much public reading of scripture. There's not as much teaching of each other or looking at each other. It's all focused on one man at the front. And I'm sure there's some advantages to that, but I also think some things are missing as a part of that.
gadol Elohai Shiu ki gadol.
This is a better shot close up of Mount Gilboa. What's important to see here is what kind of terrain did they do battle on, and how did they try to escape the Philistines, especially when Saul and Jonathan went up these mountains. Here's a closer view of Gideon's Spring. It's hard to imagine that. What was it like for Gideon to decide to discern 10,000 men and just choose 300 out of them? How long did it take? How did they get into this? Really, it's sort of like a little river gorge. It's really kind of a narrow thing. It's not a broad valley near here. It's more of a chasm. It's narrow, but it's very active. There's water everywhere around us, underneath us, just gushing out of the hills from all over the place. But again, how would he get so many men down here? How long would it take for him to discern them? Who would be the ones that would have the honor of fighting for the Lord? We're at Beth She'an. Some people translate it as meaning house of rest, but more likely the other translation, house of She'an, which is a pagan god, is more likely. And the reason I say that is because this area has constantly throughout history attracted pagan gods. In fact, we're looking at something that a Roman amphitheater we're standing at, and in the background you had seen a tell, a man-made hill that we've been talking about. In Roman times there was a Parthenon-like structure up there, a religious structure, and the point I'm trying to make is this area has constantly been fought over by pagans. Where was it in biblical times? What did we see in biblical times? One of the most important things that happened here was that the Philistines had controlled the area at the time. And this is where Saul and Jonathan had died. They, up on Mount Gilboa, and then were brought here, their bodies, and hung on the wall as a trophy. And Saul's head was cut off and taken nearby to the pagan shrine to the god Dagon, which is a fish god, Philistine fish god. We're about 15 miles we're completely on the other side of the Jezreel Valley, about 15 miles from Megiddo, where we were yesterday. And this area is, again, militarily significant. The reason it's so contested over, just like Megiddo, is that there was crossroads from here. Philistines tended to be on the west side of Israel along the Mediterranean, towns like Gath, Ekron, and they used the trade route called the Way of the Sea. This has a trade route too that connects to the Way of the Sea, only it went east-west from the Way of the Sea up to Syria and then into Europe. It's called the King's Highway. And so, just like Megiddo, this area was highly contested too by pagans. It was interesting to drive by today and see one of the streets was actually named in Hebrew, for translation, King Saul Road. They still honor him.
Shaul Hamalek.
Yeah, Shaul Hamalek, Derek, way of Saul, King Saul. Okay.
Elohai, kol echad yileh, gadol Elohai.
which was later called Scythopolis. It was named by the Romans, taken over by the Romans. It had been captured by many and held by many different pagan cultures before that. But as usual, the Romans have to go big or go home, and they don't like going home. So they did everything with style here. It's unbelievable. But anyways, here's some of the ruins left over, some pieces from history. Here's a capital. I was talking to Chorazin. It's not quite as ornate because it was a Jewish town. But this is a very ornate Corinthian capital, and it has papyrus leaves on it. That's what I was trying to say in the other video. I believe I failed to say it. You'll also notice that there's actually even marble here, polished marble, which was really expensive. In here, we see this was an opulent city. There's still mosaics from the 4th century all around here. Baths, massive baths. You get the sense when you walk around here of what an entire wealthy Roman town would have looked like.
Gado